Having considered the overwhelming evidence and the extreme depravity of your actions, this court must impose a sentence that reflects the gravity of the harm you have caused. Therefore, on all counts, you are sentenced to a total term of 200 years.
These were the words of Judge Marilyn Reynolds, delivered with a cold, final gravity that filled the Charleston County Courthouse. The recipient of this staggering sentence was not a hardened criminal or a seasoned killer, but a 17-year-old girl named Ashley Callison. Her crime: the execution-style murders of her sister-in-law, Sophia Mitchell, and her two young nephews, 5-year-old Liam and 3-year-old Noah. The murders occurred in the middle of a sunny Monday afternoon, a time of day when the quiet, well-established neighborhood where the Mitchell family lived was usually filled with the mundane sounds of suburban life. Instead, it became the setting for a senseless tragedy that would devastate a family and shock the tight-knit Charleston community. David Mitchell, Ashley's older brother, had left for his job at a prestigious financial firm early that morning, kissing his wife and sons goodbye, completely unaware that it would be the last time he would see them alive. His wife, Sophia, had spent the morning like any other, taking Liam to preschool and running errands with little Noah, returning home around noon. Text messages recovered from Sophia's phone showed a day filled with the normal, happy communications of a young family. She sent sweet updates to her husband about the boys' activities and made plans for dinner that evening. According to records later presented in court, Ashley Callison arrived at her brother's home at approximately 2:15 p.m., just after Liam had returned from preschool on the afternoon school bus. Home security footage from a neighbor's camera captured Ashley's distinctive red hatchback pulling into the driveway. Sophia, by all accounts, welcomed her young sister-in-law into the home. Ashley was a familiar face, a frequent visitor who occasionally helped with the children and was seen by the world as a doting aunt. At 2:43 p.m., the timeline of a perfect afternoon was preserved forever. Sophia sent a series of short, happy video clips to her husband's phone. The videos captured the innocent joy of her children's world. Noah, parading around the living room in his favorite Captain America costume that he often refused to take off, and Liam, proudly showing off an elaborate tower he had constructed with his building blocks. These videos would become a crucial, heartbreaking piece of evidence, establishing the last moments of the victims' lives. They also confirmed that just 4 minutes later, all 3 of them would be dead. The exact details of what transpired in those critical 4 minutes remain known only to the killer, but forensic evidence would later paint a horrifying picture. The first victim was Sophia, shot once in the back of the head while she sat on the living room sofa, likely watching her sons play. The bullet trajectory indicated she never saw it coming. After shooting Sophia, the killer then turned the weapon on 5-year-old Liam, who appeared to have been shot while attempting to run from the room, perhaps in fear after witnessing what had happened to his mother. Little Noah, still in his Captain America costume, was the final victim. He was shot while hiding behind an armchair, his small body found in a position that suggested he had tried to make himself invisible, as young children instinctively do when faced with an unimaginable threat. At 3:17 p.m., approximately 30 minutes after the shootings, Ashley Callison called her brother, David. His world, and the community's sense of safety, was about to shatter. According to David's later testimony, Ashley's voice was frantic as she spun a terrifying tale. She claimed she had gone to visit Sophia and the boys but had heard a loud noise and a man's voice shouting as she approached the house. She said she had cautiously entered through the unlocked back door, only to discover the 3 bodies in the living room. She told her brother she had immediately run from the house in terror and was calling him from her car, parked safely down the street. David, in a state of shock and disbelief, immediately called 911. The recording of that call would later capture his escalating panic. "My sister just called," he told the dispatcher, his voice breaking. "She says my wife and kids are hurt. There was an intruder." If you are finding this true crime analysis compelling, please hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like, and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your support allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light, seeking understanding where there often seems to be none. When Charleston police officers arrived at 3:28 p.m., they found the horrific scene just as it had been described. But to the lead investigator, Detective Ryan Cooper, a 15-year veteran of the Homicide Division, the story of an intruder didn't add up. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing of value appeared to be stolen. And the murder weapon, a 9mm handgun, was found left behind on the coffee table. Most unsettling of all was the demeanor of the sole witness. As Detective Cooper would later testify, Ashley Callison's display of shock and grief felt strangely rehearsed, her story too detailed, too clean. The hunt for a phantom intruder was about to become a painstaking deconstruction of a family's darkest secret. Over the course of this story, we will show you how investigators used a digital timeline, a mountain of forensic evidence, and the chilling words from a secret personal journal to expose the truth. A truth hidden behind the composed, innocent face of a 17-year-old girl who had just murdered her brother's entire family. Detective Ryan Cooper arrived at the Mitchell home on that March afternoon with the heavy sense of inevitability that accompanies a call involving children. In his 15 years as a homicide investigator with the Charleston Police Department, these were the scenes that settled deepest, the ones that lingered long after the case files were closed. The street was already a tableau of suburban tragedy. Flashing lights painting streaks of red and blue across tasteful brick facades. Neighbors clustered on their lawns with expressions of shock and disbelief, and a profound, unnatural silence where the sounds of an ordinary afternoon should have been. Cooper took a deep breath before stepping out of his unmarked sedan, a practiced ritual to wall off the personal and engage the professional. But as he ducked under the yellow tape, the sight of a child's bicycle lying on its side in the driveway was a stark, immediate reminder that no wall is ever high enough. Inside, the home was a paradox. The air was thick with the metallic scent of violence, yet the scene itself was a snapshot of a loving, vibrant family life. The refrigerator was a colorful mosaic of children's artwork and school notices. A half-finished puzzle was laid out on a rug in the den. In the living room, where the horror was concentrated, a tower of building blocks stood precariously, a testament to a moment of play that had been brutally interrupted. Detective Cooper, known for his methodical approach, began his slow, deliberate walkthrough. His job was not just to see the evidence, but to hear the story the scene was telling him. And from the very first moments, that story was full of contradictions. The first point of contention was the alleged entry point, a window in the living room. Ashley had claimed the intruder forced it open. Cooper ran a gloved hand over the frame. The pry marks were there, but they were wrong. They were shallow, almost surgical, scratching the surface of the paint without deeply splintering the wood. A frantic, panicked entry leaves a different kind of scar, one of splintered, jagged force. This looked like someone had taken their time, carefully creating the appearance of a forced entry. It was the work of a performer, not a predator. Next was the motive. The initial report suggested a home invasion robbery. But as Cooper scanned the room, that theory began to evaporate. A sleek laptop sat on a side table. A large, flat-screen television was mounted on the wall. Sophia's designer purse was perched on the kitchen counter, its contents undisturbed. These were easy, high-value targets for any thief. Yet they were all untouched. The scene was not one of a ransacking. It was eerily tidy, except for the immediate area where the victims lay. An intruder who breaks into a home, commits a triple murder, and then leaves without taking a single thing of value is not a robber. They are something else entirely. The third and most glaring contradiction was the murder weapon. A 9mm handgun lay on the coffee table, a stark, metallic object amidst the family's magazines and coasters. Intruders, especially those who commit violent acts, almost never leave their weapon behind. It is the single most damning piece of evidence that can link them to a crime. And this weapon, Cooper learned from the first responding officers, was registered to the homeowner, David Mitchell. It had been taken from a locked gun safe in the master bedroom. The safe showed no signs of being forced. This introduced a cascade of questions that Ashley's story could not answer. How would a random intruder know the Mitchells owned a gun? How would he know where the safe was located? And, most impossibly, how would he know the combination to open it? With these inconsistencies swirling in his mind, Detective Cooper turned his attention to the sole witness, Ashley Callison. He reviewed the preliminary statement she had given to the first officers on the scene. It was detailed, linear, and emotionally charged. She described the loud thump, the man's angry voice, her own terror as she hid, and the horrific discovery. It was a compelling performance. But to a detective who had interviewed hundreds of traumatized victims, it felt too compelling. Real trauma is often chaotic. Memories become fragmented, timelines blur, and victims struggle to articulate a coherent sequence of events. Ashley's story was perfect. Too perfect. It had a clear beginning, a terrifying middle, and a dramatic end. It felt less like a memory and more like a script. The hunt for the phantom intruder was over before it began. A new investigation was starting, one that would focus not on the man who wasn't there, but on the 17-year-old girl who was. At the Charleston County Police Headquarters, Ashley Callison was escorted into a soft interview room, a space designed to be less intimidating than the sterile metal rooms used for hardened criminals. It was furnished with cushioned chairs and muted colors, a place for victims and witnesses to recount traumatic events in a setting of relative calm. Ashley sat wrapped in a thick police blanket, her small frame seeming to shrink into the large chair. Her face was pale, her blonde hair was disheveled, and her eyes, wide and vacant, appeared to be staring at a horrific memory replaying itself on a loop. To any casual observer, she was the very picture of a traumatized young woman who had just stumbled into an unimaginable nightmare. Her parents, George and Elizabeth Mitchell, had insisted on accompanying her, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion, fear, and a fierce, protective concern for their daughter. They sat with her, along with an attorney they had contacted immediately, a clear sign that even in their shock, they understood the gravity of the situation. Detective Ryan Cooper entered the room with a deliberately gentle demeanor, offering Ashley a bottle of water and speaking in a calm, reassuring tone. He explained that he just needed her to walk him through what had happened, step by step, so they could understand the timeline and begin the hunt for the man who had done this. Ashley began her story, her voice a fragile, trembling whisper. She explained that it was a normal Monday afternoon. She had finished her classes and, having nothing else to do, decided to pay a visit to her sister-in-law and her nephews. It was something she did often, she said. The boys adored her, and she loved spending time with them. She described pulling into the driveway around 3 p.m., grabbing a small toy she had bought for Noah from her passenger seat. As she walked up the stone pathway to the front door, she claimed her idyllic afternoon was shattered. I heard a loud noise, like something heavy falling over, she recounted, her breathing becoming shallow and quick. And then I heard a man's voice. He was shouting, angry. I couldn't make out the words, but it was just pure rage. She told the detectives she froze on the front steps, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to do. Her first instinct, she said, was to run to call the police. But then she thought of Sophia, of Liam and Noah inside. What if they were hurt? What if they needed her? Torn between fear and concern, she claimed she crept around to the back of the house, remembering that Sophia often left the back door unlocked when she was home. She said she pushed the door open a few inches and called out Sophia's name, her voice barely a whisper. There was no answer, only a heavy, terrifying silence. Mustering all her courage, she pushed the door fully open and stepped inside. The kitchen was empty. She called out again, louder this time. Sophia? Liam? It's Aunt Ashley. Still nothing. As she moved from the kitchen toward the living room, she said she saw the first sign that something was terribly wrong. An overturned lamp and shattered pieces of a vase on the floor. And then, she saw them. She described the scene in short, choked bursts, pausing to take shuddering breaths as if the memory was too painful to articulate. She said she saw Sophia on the sofa first, then Liam on the floor near the hallway. Her mind, she claimed, couldn't process it. She saw the blood, but it didn't seem real. It was only when she saw little Noah, in his Captain America costume, lying so still behind the armchair, that the full weight of the horror crashed down on her. I think I screamed, she whispered, her eyes squeezed shut. I don't really remember. I just knew I had to get out. What if he was still in the house? She told the detectives she backed away slowly, her legs shaking, and ran out the back door without touching anything. She didn't stop running until she got to her car. She fumbled with her keys, her hands trembling too much to start the engine. Instead, she drove just a few blocks away, pulled over to the side of the road, and called the first person she could think of who could possibly fix this impossible situation. Her brother, David. Her story was detailed, emotionally resonant, and internally consistent. It accounted for the timeline, the supposed intruder, and her own actions. It was the perfect, heartbreaking account of a grieving witness. And for a few crucial hours, it was the only story the police had. While Ashley Callison was delivering her heart-wrenching performance at the police station, a different story was being quietly assembled 2 miles away, not from human memory, but from the cold, impartial memory of machines. Detective Ryan Cooper had felt an immediate, instinctual doubt about Ashley's narrative. Now, his team of crime scene investigators began to find the objective facts that would turn that doubt into concrete suspicion. The first thread to be pulled from Ashley's web of lies came from the Mitchell family's home security system. While it didn't have cameras, the system maintained a meticulous electronic log, a digital diary of every time a door or window was opened or closed. Detectives downloaded the data log for the afternoon of March 14th. The log showed the back door, the one Ashley claimed to have entered, had been opened only twice. The first time was at 2:17 p.m. The second time was at 3:15 p.m. There were no other entries recorded during that entire hour. This simple, binary data presented an immediate and insurmountable problem for Ashley's story. If she had arrived around 3 p.m., as she claimed, the system would have recorded her entry. It hadn't. The 2:17 p.m. entry was likely her actual arrival. More damningly, if an intruder had entered through that same door, his entry and exit would have been logged. They weren't. There was no digital evidence of any phantom intruder. Ashley Callison, according to the home's own digital brain, was the only person who came and went during the critical time frame. This discovery was a significant crack in her story, but the evidence that would blow it wide open was still to be found. It was located on the living room sofa, just inches from where Sophia Mitchell's body lay. Her smartphone. Forensic technicians carefully bagged the device and rushed it to the lab for analysis. What they found on it was a time capsule from the final moments of a family's life. At 2:43 p.m., just minutes before the medical examiner estimated the murders had occurred, Sophia had sent a series of short video clips to her husband, David. The videos were heartbreaking in their normality. The first showed 5-year-old Liam, his face a mask of concentration, carefully placing the final block on an impressively tall tower. Sophia's voice could be heard in the background, warm and full of maternal pride. "Show Daddy your tower, Liam. It's the biggest one yet." The second video was of 3-year-old Noah, a blur of red, white, and blue as he pranced around the room in his beloved Captain America costume, holding a small shield. And in the third clip, as Sophia panned the camera back to Liam, a figure was visible for a fleeting second in the background, sitting in an armchair, watching the boys. It was Ashley Callison. The timestamp on those videos was 2:43 p.m. The medical examiner, based on preliminary findings at the scene, had placed the time of death between 2:45 and 2:50 p.m. This wasn't just a discrepancy. It was an impossibility. It proved, beyond any doubt, that Ashley's story of arriving after the fact was a complete fabrication. She was not a witness who stumbled upon a tragedy. She was present. She was in the room watching her nephews play, just 4 minutes before they and their mother were executed. The digital timeline was inescapable. Ashley Callison was in the house when the Mitchell family was alive, and she was in the house when they were killed. The hunt for the intruder was officially over. The investigation now had a new, singular focus: figuring out what happened in those fatal 4 minutes, and why the grieving aunt was lying. Back at the police station, the atmosphere in the soft interview room was about to change. Detective Ryan Cooper re-entered, his demeanor no longer that of a gentle fact-finder, but of a seasoned investigator holding a winning hand. He placed 2 items on the table in front of Ashley Callison. The first was a printout of the home security system's data log, with the 2 relevant timestamps, 2:17 p.m. and 3:15 p.m., highlighted in yellow. The second was a series of high-resolution still images printed from Sophia's final videos. One of the images was a crystal-clear shot of Ashley herself, sitting in the armchair, a faint, unreadable expression on her face as she watched the boys play. "Ashley, we have a problem," Cooper began, his voice calm but firm. "Your story doesn't match the facts. The security log shows you were the only person to enter and leave the house during that hour. And these pictures, taken by Sophia at 2:43 p.m., show you in the living room with the family, just moments before they were killed. Can you explain that?" Ashley stared at the images, her mask of traumatized grief momentarily faltering. For the first time, a flicker of something else, calculation, perhaps even panic, appeared in her eyes. She glanced at her attorney, who whispered to her briefly. The story she had so carefully constructed was collapsing in real time. The perfect, heartbreaking account of a grieving witness was now just a lie, exposed by the impartial memory of machines. When she spoke, her voice was still quiet, but the trembling vulnerability was gone, replaced by a defensive edge. "Okay," she said, her eyes darting between the photos and the detective. "I got the time wrong. I was upset. I must have gotten there earlier than I thought." This was the first retreat, the first tactical adjustment. The narrative of the horrified witness was being rewritten on the fly. "So you were there earlier?" Cooper pressed, leaning forward slightly. "Tell me the new timeline. You were there, playing with the boys, and then what happened?" Ashley took a shaky breath, her mind clearly racing to construct a new version of events that could accommodate the damning evidence. "I was there for a while. "We were playing," she began, the story forming as she spoke. "And then I remembered I had left a textbook I needed in my car. I went outside to get it. I was only gone for a few minutes. When I came back in, that's when I found them. The man. The intruder. He must have come in while I was outside." It was a clever pivot, a desperate attempt to create a new, narrow window of opportunity for her phantom intruder. But it was also a critical mistake. In abandoning her original, detailed story, she had revealed her capacity for deception. She was no longer a traumatized victim struggling with a chaotic memory. She was a suspect, actively adapting her alibi in the face of contradictory evidence. Detective Cooper noted the shift. He didn't challenge the new story immediately. Instead, he let her commit to it, asking for specific details. Which door did she use when she went out to her car? Did she see anyone on the street? How long exactly was she outside? With each question, the new story became more elaborate, and with each new detail, she dug herself into a deeper hole. She claimed she used the back door, but the security log showed no exit or entry at that time. She claimed she didn't see anyone, which was plausible, but her inability to provide a consistent timeline for how long she was gone revealed the lie. First, she said it was a minute or two, then maybe 5 minutes. This constant shifting demonstrated a consciousness of guilt, the frantic mental calculus of someone trying to make an impossible story fit the facts. The web of lies was not just unraveling. It was becoming a tangled mess, and Ashley Callison was caught squarely in the middle of it. The grieving witness was gone, and in her place sat a cornered suspect, her credibility evaporating with every word she spoke. While Ashley Callison's narrative was collapsing under the weight of its own inconsistencies, a separate, more powerful story was being told in the sterile environment of the Charleston County Crime Lab. This story was not based on shifting memories or desperate lies, but on the immutable laws of physics and biology. Prosecutor Grace Taylor, who had joined the investigation, referred to this as building the fortress of forensics. A wall of scientific proof so high and so thick that no defense could possibly breach it. The first brick in that wall was the murder weapon itself. The 9mm handgun found on the coffee table was sent to the lab for analysis. Firearms expert James Hernandez testified that the weapon was a perfect match for the bullets recovered from the 3 victims. More importantly, he detailed the fingerprint evidence. Ashley's prints were found on the exterior of the gun, which could plausibly be explained by her claim of picking it up. But her prints were also found in places an innocent witness would never touch. A clear partial print was lifted from the side of the magazine, inside the gun's handle. Another was found on the base of an unfired bullet still inside that magazine. These patterns were consistent with only one activity: loading the weapon. It suggested she hadn't just found the gun. She had prepared it. The second brick was the invisible evidence of gunshot residue, or GSR. When a gun is fired, it expels a microscopic cloud of vaporized metal particles from the primer. These particles, invisible to the naked eye, travel a short distance and settle on the shooter's hands, face, and clothing. Ashley's initial story was that she had run from the house in terror. Her revised story was that she might have briefly touched the gun. But the GSR results told a different story entirely. Significant concentrations of gunshot residue were found on both of her hands, with a particularly heavy deposit in the webbing between the thumb and forefinger of her right hand, a classic sign of someone who has firmly gripped and fired a handgun. Trace amounts were even found on her right cheek and the sleeve of her sweater. An expert testified that this distribution pattern was entirely inconsistent with briefly touching a weapon. It was, however, perfectly consistent with someone who had stood in close proximity to a firearm as it was discharged 3 separate times. The science didn't lie. Ashley Callison had fired the gun. The final and most damning brick was the blood spatter analysis. Ashley's revised alibi was that she had entered the room after the shootings and discovered the bodies. But the blood told a story of her presence during the violence. Crime scene analysts, using high-powered lights and chemical agents, discovered microscopic droplets of blood on the shoes she had been wearing. These were not transfer stains from stepping in a pool of blood, which would be large and irregular. These were fine, atomized backspatter stains, tiny droplets propelled backward from a wound at the moment of a high-velocity impact, like a gunshot. These particles travel only a few feet before falling. Their presence on Ashley's shoes meant she had been standing within 3 to 5 feet of at least one of the victims at the exact moment a bullet struck them. The fortress of forensics was complete. The fingerprints proved she had loaded the gun. The gunshot residue proved she had fired the gun. and the blood spatter proved she had been standing over her victims as they died. Her lies had been exposed, and now, the unyielding truth of science was burying her. The fortress of forensics was complete. The physical evidence against Ashley Callison was absolute, a silent, irrefutable testament to her guilt. In the sterile logic of a police report, the case was closed. But for Detective Ryan Cooper and Prosecutor Grace Taylor, the real mystery was just beginning. The who was a fortress, but the why was a fog. What could possibly motivate a 17-year-old girl, with no history of violence, to execute her sister-in-law and two small nephews with such cold precision? The investigation now turned inward, away from the blood and ballistics, and toward the dark, hidden territory of Ashley Callison's mind. They began a psychological autopsy, peeling back the layers of a life in search of an answer. Their first stop was Portergaud, the prestigious private school Ashley attended. To her teachers and classmates, Ashley was practically invisible, a quiet, unremarkable student who floated on the periphery of social circles. She was not an outcast, but she wasn't a leader either. She was simply there. Her grades, until recently, had been respectable. She had a small, tight-knit group of friends. On the surface, she was the picture of a normal, perhaps slightly introverted teenage girl. The school's headmaster, when interviewed, expressed a profound and genuine shock. There were no red flags, he stated. A phrase investigators would hear again and again. No disciplinary issues, no reports of bullying, nothing that would ever suggest she was capable of this. But as detectives dug deeper, the facade of normalcy began to show hairline cracks. Her closest friend, a girl named Melissa Chun, described a gradual but definite change in Ashley over the last few months. Following a breakup with her long-term boyfriend, Jason Turner, Ashley had become increasingly withdrawn and paranoid. She started canceling plans at the last minute and would go days without responding to texts, Chun told detectives. When I asked if she was okay, she would just say she was fine, but that she couldn't trust most people anymore. This growing isolation was a classic warning sign, but one that was easily dismissed as typical teenage angst. Her academic performance mirrored her social withdrawal. Her English teacher, Barbara Hoffman, reported that Ashley's writing, once clear and analytical, had taken a darker, more abstract turn. Her essays began to fixate on themes of betrayal, hidden identities, and a deep, simmering resentment against a world she felt had wronged her. Looking back, Hoffman recalled with a sense of regret, there was a growing disconnect in her work, a bitterness that concerned me enough that I mentioned it to her guidance counselor, but nothing had come of it. The most troubling insights came from her ex-boyfriend, Jason Turner. He described a relationship that had become increasingly volatile in its final weeks. Ashley, he said, had become intensely possessive, convinced that his female friends were trying to sabotage their relationship. He recounted an incident where she had created a fake social media account to monitor his interactions with a lab partner. It was getting weird, Turner admitted, clearly uncomfortable. She would show up places where she knew I'd be, even after we broke up. But I never thought she was dangerous. Just going through a rough time. He also mentioned that Ashley had, on several occasions, made bitter comments about her brother David's perfect life, comparing his success and happy family to her own struggles. He never heard her threaten anyone, but the resentment was palpable. The investigation was painting a picture not of a monster who had appeared overnight, but of a young woman whose internal world was slowly crumbling. The evidence suggested a personality characterized by deep-seated insecurity, paranoia, and a growing resentment that was searching for a target. The perfect, happy life of her brother and his wife, Sophia, a life Ashley both coveted and despised, was beginning to look like the most likely focal point for her rage. The motive was still a ghost, but for the first time, investigators could begin to see its shape. The psychological autopsy had revealed the cracks in Ashley Callison's facade, but the true, dark architecture of her motive remained hidden. The pieces were there: jealousy, resentment, paranoia, but they hadn't yet coalesced into a coherent picture of why a teenage girl would choose to annihilate her own family. The key that would unlock the final door to her psyche was not found in an interview or a database, but in a place of adolescent secrecy. A hidden journal discovered during a second, more thorough search of her bedroom at her parents' home. The journal was a simple, spiral-bound notebook, tucked away at the bottom of a drawer beneath old clothes. Its cover was unremarkable, but the words inside were a map to a deeply disturbed mind. As Detective Cooper and Prosecutor Taylor read through the entries, a profound sense of dread settled over them. They were not reading the angsty diary of a typical teenager. They were reading the manifesto of a killer in the making. The entries from the months leading up to the murders chronicled a descent into a world of delusion and pathological jealousy. Ashley's writing was fixated on one person, her brother, David. But it was not a normal sibling affection. It was a possessive, obsessive fantasy. She wrote about him as if he were her partner, not her brother, and described his wife, Sophia, not as a sister-in-law, but as a rival, an obstacle that had stolen the life that was rightfully hers. One entry, dated approximately 6 weeks before the murders, was particularly chilling. It read, "Watch Sophia with the boys today. Everyone thinks she's so perfect. The perfect mother, the perfect wife in the perfect house. Nobody sees how she trapped him. Nobody sees how she stole the life that should have been mine. She doesn't deserve him. She doesn't deserve them." As the entries grew closer to the date of the murders, the resentment festered into something more sinister. Ashley's fantasies became more detailed, more violent. She wrote about Sophia disappearing, about accidents that could befall her. Then the entries took a final, horrifying turn. She began to write about the children. An entry from just 2 weeks before the killings read, "They are her anchors. They are the reason he will never leave her. He thinks he loves them, but they are just pieces of her. To get to him, she has to be gone. And they have to be gone, too. Then he would see. Then he would finally need me. He would see that I'm the only one who truly understands him." This was it. The why. It was not a rational motive. It was the twisted, delusional logic of a mind that had completely detached from reality. Ashley had not killed Sophia out of simple jealousy. She had erased her, believing it was a necessary step to claim a life she felt was hers. And the children, her own nephews, were not seen as innocent victims, but as collateral damage, extensions of the woman she needed to eliminate. Her plan was not just to kill Sophia, but to create a vacuum of tragedy so immense that her brother would have no one else to turn to but her. She would become his savior, his sole source of comfort, the one who would help him rebuild his shattered life. In her mind, this act of ultimate destruction was a perverse act of creation, the creation of a world where she and David could finally be together. The journal was the prosecution's smoking gun. It transformed the case from a circumstantial, if forensically strong, murder trial into a terrifying journey into the mind of a killer. It proved that this was not a sudden, impulsive act driven by a mental health crisis. It was the calculated, methodical execution of a dark and deeply held fantasy. The facade of normalcy was not just cracked. It was annihilated. The quiet, unremarkable girl from Portugal was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating predator who had documented her own descent into madness and murder. On January 9, 2023, nearly 10 months after the murders, the trial of the state of South Carolina versus Ashley Callison began. The Charleston County Courthouse, a place accustomed to the grim realities of crime, had an atmosphere of unusually heavy anticipation. This was not just a murder trial. It was an inquest into the nature of evil itself, and how it could fester behind the innocent face of a teenage girl. The case had drawn national attention, and the courtroom was a standing room only assembly of press, legal observers, and a community still grappling with the horror. When Ashley Callison was led into the courtroom, a murmur went through the gallery. The young woman who took her seat at the defense table was a carefully constructed image of sorrowful innocence. Her previously long hair had been cut into a severe, almost matronly bob. She wore a conservative, high-collared navy blue dress, and her face, scrubbed clean of all makeup, was pale and drawn. She looked younger than her 18 years, a fragile, wrongly accused victim swallowed by the intimidating machinery of the justice system. It was a masterful performance, a visual narrative crafted by her defense team to plant the first seeds of doubt in the jury's mind. Throughout the opening proceedings, she sat perfectly still, her gaze fixed forward, a solitary tear occasionally tracing a path down her cheek, which she would dab away with a delicate, trembling hand. Prosecutor Grace Taylor began her opening statement with a cold, deliberate fury. She walked the jury through the timeline, the forensic evidence, and the digital trail of lies. "This case," she stated, her voice ringing with conviction, "is about the brutal execution-style murder of a mother and her 2 small children. The evidence will show, beyond any reasonable doubt, that the person who pulled the trigger was not a phantom intruder, but the defendant, Ashley Callison." She then introduced the central, chilling motive, holding up a redacted copy of the secret journal. "What you will hear," she promised the jury, are the defendant's own words, words of pathological jealousy, of a delusional obsession, and of a plan to annihilate a family to fulfill a twisted fantasy. Then it was the defense's turn. Her attorney, Rebecca Walsh, approached the jury not with anger, but with a tone of reasoned compassion. "The prosecution has painted a picture of a monster," she began, her voice soft and persuasive. "We are here to show you the truth. The picture of a child, a 17-year-old girl, struggling with undiagnosed mental illness, whose fragile mind snapped under pressures none of us can fully comprehend." Walsh's narrative was one of diminished capacity. She did not contest that Ashley was present, nor that a tragedy had occurred. Instead, she argued that Ashley's actions were the result of a profound psychological breakdown, not of cold-blooded, calculated malice. The trial was now framed. It was a battle of two opposing narratives: Grace Taylor's methodical, calculating killer versus Rebecca Walsh's broken, mentally ill child. And at the center of it all sat Ashley Callison, her face a perfect mask of angelic sorrow, waiting for the jury to decide which version of her they would believe. The prosecution's case unfolded with methodical and devastating precision. Jurors saw the forensic evidence linking Ashley to the gun, the digital timeline that destroyed her alibi, and they heard the chilling, narcissistic entries read from her secret journal. But the emotional climax of the trial, the moment that stripped away all legal theory and exposed the raw, human heart of the tragedy, came when the state called its final witness. "The prosecution calls David Mitchell," Grace Taylor announced. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom as David Mitchell walked to the witness stand. He had not attended the trial until this moment, unable to bear sitting in the same room as the sister who had destroyed his world. His face was drawn, and he moved with the weary reluctance of a man being forced to relive his worst nightmare. As he took the stand, his gaze briefly met Ashley's. His expression was a complex, unreadable mixture of grief, betrayal, and a deep, bottomless sorrow. Ashley, for her part, looked at him with the same practiced, sorrowful innocence she had shown the jury, a final, chilling performance of a love that her own journal had proven was a lie. His testimony began with Grace Taylor gently asking him to describe his family. In a quiet voice that frequently broke with emotion, David painted a picture of a happy, loving home. He spoke of Sophia's kindness, her infectious laugh, and the joy she took in being a mother. He described Liam's insatiable curiosity and Noah's goofy, superhero-obsessed energy. He wasn't describing victims. He was bringing his family back to life, making them real for the jury, so they could understand the true magnitude of what had been lost. Jurors and spectators wept openly as he recounted the last normal morning he had shared with them. The most difficult part of his testimony came when Taylor guided him through the afternoon of the murders. He recounted the frantic, panicked phone call from Ashley, her voice a torrent of terrifying, fabricated words. She said there was a man shouting, David testified, his voice barely a whisper. She said she went inside and found them. She sounded so scared. I believed her. I never, for a second, thought. His voice trailed off, the weight of his own sister's betrayal too heavy to put into words. The most crucial piece of his testimony directly connected Ashley to the murder weapon. "Did Ashley know the combination to your gun safe?" Taylor asked. David nodded slowly, his face a mask of pain. "Yes," he said. "She did. Our family used to go target shooting together. I taught her. The combination was our wedding date. She knew it." With that single, devastating admission, the final link in the chain of premeditation was forged. During cross-examination, Rebecca Walsh, the defense attorney, was gentle, almost apologetic. She had only one real question. "Mr. Mitchell," she asked, her voice soft with sympathy. "In the months before these tragic events, did you notice any changes in Ashley's behavior that concerned you?" David considered the question, a flicker of a memory in his eyes. "She had become more withdrawn," he conceded. "She made some comments about Sophia having a perfect life, but it just sounded like normal teenage complaints. I never, ever imagined she was capable of this." He looked at his sister, his expression not of anger, but of a profound and heartbreaking bewilderment. "She was at our wedding. She held my sons the day they were born. How do you go from that to this?" It was a question that hung in the silent courtroom, a question for which there would never be an adequate answer. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. In a case of such emotional and psychological complexity, the speed of their decision sent a clear and unambiguous signal through the courthouse. When the jury foreperson sent word to the judge that they had reached a verdict, a heavy, final silence settled over the courtroom. Ashley Callison was led back to the defense table, her face a pale, composed mask, though observers noted the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her hands. Her parents sat behind her, clutching each other, their faces a portrait of parental agony, trapped in an impossible space between their daughter and the grandchildren she had murdered. The 12 jurors filed in, their faces grim and resolute, none making eye contact with the defendant. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman, handed the verdict form to the bailiff. The courtroom held its collective breath as the judge reviewed the document before handing it to the clerk to be read aloud. The clerk's voice was steady, cutting through the thick tension. On the first count of murder in the first degree in the death of Sophia Mitchell, we the jury find the defendant, Ashley Callison, guilty. A muffled sob escaped from Elizabeth Mitchell, Ashley's mother. On the second count of murder in the first degree in the death of Liam Mitchell, we find the defendant, guilty. George Mitchell put his arm around his wife, his own face ashen. On the third count of murder in the first degree in the death of Noah Mitchell, we find the defendant, guilty. With the final word, the carefully constructed facade that Ashley Callison had maintained for nearly a year finally cracked. Her posture, previously so controlled, seemed to collapse inward. An expression of pure, uncomprehending shock flashed across her face, her eyes wide as if she genuinely could not believe what she was hearing. The angelic mask of sorrow was gone, replaced by the blank, stunned face of a performer whose audience had just booed her off the stage. Judge Reynolds polled each juror individually, their voices firm and unwavering as they each confirmed the verdict. The legal process was complete. The wall of forensic evidence, the inescapable digital timeline, and the chilling words from her own secret journal had been too much for any defense to overcome. As the judge thanked the jury for their service and set a date for sentencing, the full weight of the moment seemed to crash down on the families. Sophia's parents, who had remained stoic throughout the trial, embraced each other, their bodies shaking with a grief that was now mixed with a grim sense of justice. As bailiffs moved to escort Ashley from the courtroom, her composure finally shattered completely. Her blank shock gave way to a dawning, panic terror. For the first time, she looked not like a cold, calculating killer, but like a child, a lost and broken teenager who was just beginning to comprehend the infinite and permanent consequences of her actions. She turned, her eyes scanning the gallery, searching for her parents, for her brother, for anyone, but no one could meet her gaze. She was utterly and completely alone, adrift in the void she herself had created. The sentencing hearing was a somber final act in a tragedy that had left no one untouched. The courtroom was filled not with the morbid curiosity of a trial, but with the heavy presence of a community seeking closure. The first to speak was Robert Reynolds, Sophia's father. He approached the podium and spoke not of hatred, but of the unending emptiness his daughter's murder had left behind. "There is a difference between living and merely continuing to breathe," he said, his voice thick with a grief that had not lessened with time. "We have learned that difference in the cruelest possible way." But the most powerful impact statement came from David Mitchell. He stood before the judge, a man hollowed out by a loss that was impossible to measure. He spoke directly to his sister for the first and last time. "I've tortured myself trying to understand what could have driven you to do this," he began, his voice a low, pained whisper. "Was there something I missed? Some sign I should have seen? But the truth is, there was no rational reason. This was just senseless cruelty against people who had shown you nothing but love." He looked at Ashley, his eyes filled not with rage, but with a deep, bottomless bewilderment. "You didn't just kill my wife and my sons, Ashley. You killed the brother who loved you. You killed our family. There are no winners today, only varying degrees of loss that will echo through our family for generations." When offered the chance to speak, Ashley rose, her voice a fragile, uncertain whisper. "I know everyone thinks I did these terrible things," she said, her words focusing on her own confusion, her own experience. "But it doesn't feel real to me. None of it does. It's like everyone's talking about someone else." It was not an apology. It was a final, chilling confirmation of the profound, narcissistic disconnect that had allowed her to commit the murders in the first place. Judge Marilyn Reynolds listened to it all, her face a mask of judicial stone. When it was her time to speak, her voice was cold with a righteous fury that had been held in check for the entire trial. "Ashley Callison," she began, "you have been convicted of 3 counts of murder in the first degree. crimes of unimaginable cruelty, committed against your own family, including 2 small children who deserved nothing but protection. The psychological issues identified by your defense may help explain your actions, but they cannot excuse them. The judge looked directly at the 19-year-old girl. The evidence shows a level of planning and a chilling lack of remorse that is, frankly, beyond the comprehension of this court. You have forfeited your right to live in a civilized society. She then pronounced the sentence, her words falling like a hammer. On each count of murder in the 1st degree, I sentence you to life imprisonment. These sentences are to be served consecutively. A gasp went through the courtroom. The judge wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, powerful growl. For the clarity of the record, and so that there is no misunderstanding for any future parole board, the total sentence is 200 years. You have taken lives that cannot be restored, and broken a trust that cannot be repaired. You will spend the remainder of your natural life in prison. With those words, the legal process was over. Ashley Callison was led away, her face finally, completely blank, the last flicker of emotion extinguished, leaving only the empty shell of a girl who had murdered her family for a fantasy and received an eternity in a cage as her prize. The void she had created in the lives of so many had now, at last, swallowed her whole.